Cher was born Cheryl Sarkisian on May 20th, 1946, in El Centro, California. From the very start, her life was anything but stable. Her mother, Georgia Holt, was a struggling singer, actress, and model with a tendency to choose the wrong men. Cher's father, John Sarkisian, an Armenian-American truck driver, battled drug and alcohol addiction. Their marriage to Holt ended tragically for Cheryl, as the girl ended up in an orphanage for several months. She was just a baby, but years later, she would call it one of the most traumatic experiences of her life. In 1951, her mother married again, this time to actor John Southall, and Cher gained a half-sister, Jordana. Southall, though, also had a drinking problem, and while Cher later said he felt like a real father, she never forgot how aggressive he became when he drank. When that marriage collapsed, Georgia hit a rough patch. She packed up her daughters and moved from place to place, chasing jobs that rarely panned out. Cher remembered those years as some of the hardest in her life, walking in worn-out shoes she had stitched herself, often without enough to eat. School didn't offer much comfort either. Cher struggled with dyslexia and felt out of place because of how she looked. Reading and writing were a battle, and she never quite fit in. But Georgia saw something in her daughter. She constantly reminded Cher to embrace what made her different and poured every last dollar she had into acting classes and singing lessons. When they eventually moved to Los Angeles, Cher threw herself into performance, acting, singing, dancing, anything that got her on a stage. The turning point came at a school concert. She got up to sing, and when the audience applauded, something clicked. For the first time, she felt confident, like she belonged. A few years later, when Georgia married a bank manager named Gilbert Lapierre, life got a little easier. He adopted both girls and enrolled them in a private school in Encino. But by then, Cher had already made up her mind. She wasn't meant for school. She was meant for fame, and she knew her voice and charisma would take her there. At just 16, Cher dropped out of school and moved in with a friend. She started making ends meet by dancing in nightclubs along Hollywood's Sunset Strip. But it wasn't about the money. Not really. Cher was there to make connections, and she wasn't shy. She'd approach anyone, actors, managers, agents, anyone who might open a door. And one day, one of those doors finally did. In November 1962, she met Sonny Bono. He was a budding musician and worked as an assistant to legendary producer Phil Spector. At first, Sonny hired Cher as his housekeeper, but it didn't take long for him to notice her talent. He introduced her to Spector, who gave her a shot, first as a backup singer, and then, in 1964, her own single. That single was called Ringo, I Love You. It was released under the name Bonnie Jo Mason because Spector believed an American-sounding name would sell better. The song itself was pure Beatlemania marketing, not much creative substance, and it flopped badly. Some radio stations even refused to play it, mistaking Cher's deep contralto voice for a man and assuming it was a gay love song to Ringo's star. But the failure didn't faze her. If anything, it brought her and Sonny even closer. By October 1964, they were married. A quick, impulsive wedding in a Tijuana hotel room. But more importantly, Sonny was still all in on Cher's talent. He organized a solo concert for her, a big opportunity. But when the moment came, she froze. All the confidence she'd once had vanished. Cher later admitted that stage fright overwhelmed her, so Sonny stepped in and sang with her. That duet calmed her nerves and marked the start of something new. By the end of 1964, they were recording songs as a duo under the name Caesar and Cleo. But again, nothing caught on. Still, these early attempts helped Cher land a deal with the Imperial label, and Sonny became her producer. Her first solo single for the label, Dream Baby, released under the name Cherilyn, went nowhere. But the next move changed everything. The label suggested she record a cover of Bob Dylan's All I Really Want to Do. It was the right call. Released under the simpler stage name Cher, the single broke into the US Billboard Hot 100 at number 15 and climbed to number 9 in the UK. Riding that momentum, Sonny produced Cher's debut album, also titled All I Really Want to Do, which dropped in August 1965. Although the album was entirely made up of covers, it was Cher who handpicked the songs. She didn't go for safe love ballads. Instead, she chose songs with political and social themes, wrapped in accessible pop, a bold move for a teenage girl in 1965. What made it special wasn't just the song choices, but how Cher interpreted them. She didn't just mimic the originals, she reframed them from a female perspective. In doing so, she made a subtle statement. I'm not just a singer, I have something to say. Musically, the album didn't break any boundaries, but it did lay a solid foundation. It proved Cher could work with serious material and still maintain her unique voice. The album reached number 16 on the Billboard 200, a strong debut for a brand new solo artist. And with that, Cher returned to singing with Sonny, now under a new name that would soon become iconic, Sonny and Cher. At the time, Sonny Bono had just written a new song, I Got You Babe. Inspired by Bob Dylan's It Ain't Me Babe, Sonny took a different approach. Where Dylan was layered and complex, Sonny was direct. The song opened with a defiant line about the tension between youth and adults. They, who don't believe in young love, but quickly softened into a sweet back-and-forth exchange between two people in love. It was simple, it was catchy, and it worked. Sonny and Cher recorded the track and released it in July 1965. It exploded. By August, I Got You Babe hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and even dethroned the Beatles on the UK charts. Riding that wave, the duo rushed to release their debut album, Look at Us, and it landed like a bombshell. Musically, the formula was clear: stripped-down arrangements, a solid rhythm section, minimalist production, and that unmistakable vocal contrast. Sonny's soft, mellow tone paired with Cher's rich, commanding contralto. At a time when folk rock was surging, thanks to Dylan and the Byrds, Sonny and Cher gave the genre a pop twist, full of color and emotion. Songs like Just You and Sing C'est la Vie stood out, capturing their signature duet style. A conversation in song, romantic, and real. Look at Us soared to number 2 on the Billboard 200 and stayed there for 39 weeks, a sign of just how deeply it resonated. But more than sales, it carved out their identity. They weren't just singers, they were the it couple, the loving hippies in bell-bottoms and fur vests, standing out in a sea of cookie-cutter pop acts. The album wasn't just about love, it was the voice of a new generation, one that craved something authentic, but that magic proved hard to repeat. Their next albums, The Wondrous World of Sonny and Cher, 1966, and In Case You're in Love, 1967, failed to recreate the same impact. Sonny, convinced he had found the golden formula, kept trying to replicate their debut's success. But the music scene had moved on. The kids who once adored Sonny and Cher were now tuning in to The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, and other bands who were pushing boundaries, not playing it safe. As music grew bolder and more rebellious, Sonny and Cher began to feel outdated, like a parody of their former selves. That same pattern showed up in Cher's solo work. Her second solo album, The Sunny Side of Cher, came out in 1966. Commercially, it didn't make much noise, but it did have one standout moment. Bang Bang, My Baby Shot Me Down. The track was unlike anything else on the album. Haunting, stripped down, almost cinematic. A lone guitar riff carried the weight, while Cher's voice, raw and distant, turned heartbreak into art. For the first time, we caught a glimpse of a different Cher, not just the girl next to Sonny, but a woman who was hurting, strong, and emotionally complex. That would become the core of her identity later in her career. But the rest of the album didn't rise to the same level. It was filled with easy listening pop, gentle folk tunes, and covers. Nice enough, but nothing that pushed the envelope. The problem? The Sunny Side of Cher played it too safe. It stuck to the formula. It didn't give Cher room to take creative risks, explore new sounds, or tell her own story. It was designed to please radio stations and Sonny and Cher fans, not to challenge anyone, least of all Cher herself. In the end, the album marked a turning point. On one hand, it helped establish Cher as a solo act. On the other, it exposed the limitations of her creative freedom while working under Sonny's direction. The seed of artistic independence had been planted, but it would take time and struggle for it to grow. After a slump in their music career in the late 60s, Sonny and Cher reinvented themselves, this time on television. In 1971, the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour premiered on CBS and was an instant hit. With its mix of comedy skits, musical performances, and the undeniable chemistry between Sonny and Cher, the show catapulted them back into the spotlight. Suddenly, Cher wasn't just a singer. She was a sharp-tongued comedic actress with flawless timing. This was also when her iconic image began to form. Bold hairstyles, daring outfits designed by Bob Mackie, plunging necklines, feathers, sequins, and a personality that matched. She was magnetic, outrageous, and impossible to ignore, but her true rebirth was musical. That same year, Sonny and Cher signed a deal with MCA Records, which also took charge of launching Cher's solo career. At first, Sonny continued producing her work, but after several commercial flops, MCA realized the problem and the solution. They brought in producer Snuff Garrett, and just like that, things started to change. In late 1971, Cher released the album Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves, and the title track became her first true solo #1 hit in the US. It wasn't your typical love song. It told the story of a woman living on the fringes of society. The lyrics were raw, gritty, and full of empathy. It marked a turning point. Cher wasn't just a pop voice. She was a storyteller, a woman with something to say. What followed was a string of hits: The Way of Love in 1972, Half-Breed in 1973, and Dark Lady in 1974. The latter two also hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. These weren't bubblegum pop songs. They tackled identity, betrayal, and loneliness. Each track became a mini performance, and Cher leaned into her unique voice and looked to heighten the drama. She wasn't following trends. She was setting them, and with these hits, Cher made history. The first woman in pop to have at least one solo #1 hit 3 years in a row. But behind the scenes, her personal life was starting to crack. As soon as Snuff Garrett took over as producer, Cher's marriage to Sonny began to unravel. By the end of 1972, they had separated, but kept it quiet, afraid of how it might affect their careers. For Sonny, the writing was on the wall. While Cher was becoming a powerhouse solo act, his own career was stalling. He wasn't evolving, and he knew it. So he tightened his grip. He tried to turn Cher into his puppet, to control the brand they'd built together. She didn't tolerate it for long. In February 1974, Cher filed for divorce, citing involuntary servitude and Sonny's unbearable domination. The headlines exploded. The divorce wasn't just public, it was personal, painful, and symbolic. Cher was fighting not just for her freedom, but for her voice, her autonomy, her career. Sonny tried to hang on, to the business, to the TV show, to the image, but Cher pushed back harder. And the public, instead of turning against her, rallied behind her. Then came the twist no one expected. While her professional life was breaking away from Sonny, her personal life took a wild turn. She began dating Gregg Allman, the brooding rock guitarist from the Allman Brothers Band, a man as far from Sonny as you could get. He was volatile, addicted to drugs, and lived a chaotic life. Still, just 3 days after finalizing her divorce from Sonny, Cher married Allman in June 1975. The marriage was doomed from the start. Within days, she filed for annulment after discovering just how deep his addiction ran. But then, in true Cher fashion, she changed her mind and called it off. At that same time, the final curtain fell on the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour. Their offstage split made it impossible to continue working together. The show was canceled, and with it ended an era. Cher was now completely alone. No show, no duo, no partner, but she was finally in control of her music, her image, and her future. And yet, by marrying Gregg Allman, a troubled man who brought more chaos than comfort, she seemed to be repeating her mother's pattern, trading one unstable relationship for another. From the outside, it looked like she had everything. But behind the glam, it was still a fight. One she was learning to win on her own terms. Cher and Gregg Allman did everything they could to salvage their relationship. First came the birth of their son, Elijah Blue. Then, the ultimate gamble, a joint album, To the Hard Way, in 1977. It flopped, both critically and commercially. And by 1979, their marriage was over. That messy, uncertain period was perfectly mirrored in Cher's music. Gone were the dramatic pop ballads and folksy storytelling of her early 70s heyday. As the decade wound down, she pivoted to glam, disco, and bolder, flashier sounds. But the footing was shaky. In 1976, she signed with Warner Brothers and released 2 albums, I'd Rather Believe in You and Cherished. Both were met with a cold shrug. Pop music was evolving fast, and Cher hadn't yet figured out where she belonged in it. Her stage persona grew more sexualized, more aggressive, but the songs didn't match the edge. It all felt like noise without direction. Then came 1979. With Take Me Home, Cher finally found some commercial traction. The title track became a disco hit. She leaned into a new look, sequined leather bodysuits, big hair, sultry moves, the image of a nightclub queen. But even that success felt accidental, more like a trend-chasing move than a confident reinvention. That lack of clarity showed in what came next: The Underwhelming Prisoner, 1979, and Black Rose, 1980. The latter was an attempt to form a rock band, shed her pop star skin, and build something raw and live. It bombed. The public wasn't buying it. And so, Cher hit pause. Having spent years trying to break free from the creative grip of Sonny, and later Allman, Cher suddenly found herself truly alone. No one pulling the strings, no clear path forward. She didn't know what to sing, or even who she was musically. So she walked away and turned to acting. She moved to New York, enrolled at Lee Strasberg's acting studio, and stripped away the glam. No makeup, no feathers, just truth. In 1982, she debuted on Broadway in Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean, Jimmy Dean. A year later, she starred in Robert Altman's film version of the play. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was a revelation. Audiences saw a new Cher, restrained, vulnerable, and real. In 1983, she landed a major role in Silkwood, opposite Meryl Streep. She played Dolly Pellicker, a lesbian factory worker, understated, grounded, and unforgettable. The performance earned Cher her first Oscar nomination. It wasn't a courtesy nod to a pop star, it was earned. People began to see her not just as an entertainer, but as a serious actress. And during this period, something changed. The Cher of the early 80s wasn't glammed up or outrageous. She was stripped down, introspective, and raw. She worked hard to shake off the legacy of TV Cher and rebuild herself as a woman with emotional depth and dramatic fire. Though she wasn't topping the charts, her cultural relevance didn't fade, it evolved. By the mid-1980s, Cher wasn't just a celebrity. She had become a force, a cultural shapeshifter who earned respect for her ability to adapt and transform. And then, everything clicked. In 1987, she starred in the romantic comedy Moonstruck. Her role as Loretta Castorini, a down-to-earth, cynical widow who falls in love again, was nothing short of magical. The performance was warm, funny, deeply human, and it won her the Academy Award for Best Actress. It was the crowning moment of her acting career. But Cher wasn't done. That same year, she stormed back into music. Her self-titled album, Cher, marked the beginning of her partnership with Geffen Records and a brand new sound. I Found Someone became a smash hit, landing her in the US top 10 for the first time in nearly a decade. This wasn't disco Cher. This was a rocker, bold, defiant, draped in leather, riding motorcycles, singing with fire. She'd shifted from bubblegum to power ballads and hard rock, aiming squarely at an adult audience. Then, in 1989, she dropped Heart of Stone, one of the biggest albums of her entire career. And with it came If I Could Turn Back Time, a full-blown anthem. The song's music video, filmed aboard a Navy battleship, caused a media frenzy. Cher, in a sheer black bodysuit and thigh-high boots, straddled a cannon and scandalized America. But she also gave the 80s one of its most unforgettable pop culture moments. That was Cher in her prime, outrageous, fearless, and absolutely unstoppable. By 1990, Cher stood alone. She was the only woman of her generation who had won an Oscar, sold multi-platinum albums, ruled MTV, and remained a cultural icon recognized by both teenagers and adults. She wasn't just surviving, she was still shaping the moment. Still, as the new decade unfolded, Cher once again found herself chasing the curve of rapidly shifting pop culture. Her 1991 album, Love Hurts, was released with high hopes, but it landed with a thud. Critics were indifferent, and fans largely overlooked it. Despite regular TV appearances and commercial work, it was clear her career had stalled again. After starring in the film Faithful in 1996, Cher seemed to quietly retreat from the spotlight. But behind the scenes, something was brewing. In 1998, she did what no one saw coming. She dropped the album Believe, a game-changing masterpiece from a 52-year-old pop veteran that redefined her career and, in many ways, redefined pop music itself. The title track exploded. With its electronic beat, futuristic production, and the now iconic use of auto-tune, unheard of at the time, Believe became a global phenomenon. It wasn't just a hit, it was a resurrection. A heartbreak anthem turned into a dance floor revolution. The song hit #1 in over 20 countries, including the US and the UK. And at 52, Cher became the oldest woman ever to top the Billboard Hot 100, and the first artist in history to have top 10 hits in 6 different decades. That wasn't a comeback. That was a cultural reset. Cher's reinvention was complete. High-tech stage shows, LED costumes, provocative outfits. All of it created a blueprint that future stars like Lady Gaga would follow. She launched the Do You Believe World Tour, attracting millions of fans and proving that age is not a limitation, it's a superpower. Starting in 2002, she doubled down on her legend status. Her so-called living proof, the Farewell Tour, ran for 3 years, grossed over $250 million, and became one of the highest-earning tours by a solo artist in history. But Cher wasn't done. In 2008, she signed on for a massive Las Vegas residency, Cher at the Coliseum, performing at Caesar's Palace until 2011. The shows were a spectacle, a triumph, and a reminder. No one does live performance like Cher. Then, in 2010, she returned to film in Burlesque, and 3 years later, surprised fans again with the album Closer to the Truth. It was her first studio album in over a decade. And it didn't just do well, it hit #1. 3 on the Billboard 200, the highest chart position of her entire career at that point. By 2024, let's be honest, Cher is no longer just a pop diva. She's a phenomenon, an icon who has burned through every era, every trend, every rule, and always emerged with something new. She hasn't just outlasted her peers, she's outlasted time. There's no single golden age in Cher's story, because she turned every decade into one. She didn't just survive in an industry designed to forget women over 30, she became its eternal standard.